If you want to learn how to play country guitar solos like this, or maybe some lead chicken picking lines like this, or just playing some of your favorite country music like this, this video is for you. In this 3-hour masterclass video, I'm going to teach you everything that you need to know in order to play lead country music. Go over everything from country music theory, the choices that you need to make while you're playing to sound more country, the gear you need to use, and throw in some examples of some key players that will help elevate your playing, among a bunch of other key information to help you play your favorite music. Throughout this video, I'm going to go over my book, which I put together, everything you need to know to play country music. You don't necessarily need this. I'll have a lot of the pages up on the screen, but if you're interested in picking up a copy of the 140 pages within this country guitar book, so you can follow along with the video, there will be a link in the description box below. Country music guitar playing is a lot easier than many people are led to believe, but there are some few key ingredients and some items that you do need to learn in order to master this playing style. Let's start with music theory and let's get into it. This is everything you need to know about how to play country music from a knowledge and guitar music theory perspective. This is everything that you should know that be able to play. I'm going to say 90 to 95% of all country music. We're not going to get into jazzy things that like Western swing kind of stuff, but the stuff that you heard in the intro, stuff that you've heard on the radio for most of the last, I'm going to say 80, 90 years is going to be applicable after this video. You just have to go and learn it and apply it to country music. This will be a part of a different series. On the screen you can see some pages, PDF pages that I've created to help with this video. There'll be different sections. This is the knowledge music theory section. This is going to be the longest section, but there'll be more parts to come, talking about gear, talking about song choices, talking about techniques, etc. But this is everything that you need to know from a music theory perspective. I've been playing country guitar for about 8 years now, and I really wanted to start this channel in order to, one, practice what I'm teaching, or teaching what I'm practicing, because they say that if you teach what you practice, you learn it more. But also there was not a whole lot of information on country guitar. When I started, there's a guy named Jim Lowe, but other than that, not a whole lot of country dedication here on YouTube. So I'm trying to fill in the gaps here. So hopefully you find this helpful, and let's get on to the rodeo here. So again, my name's Ryan. So glad you guys are here. So glad that you're interested in country music, because more people need to know how to play country music, because country guitar is challenging, but it's also very rewarding and very fun. So let's get into it. Learning the notes on the fretboard. Now this should be obvious, but it took me way too long to get to the point where I can say, all right, there's a G, 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 there's a G. That took way too long for me to get to there. And by that I mean, like, I just learned how to do that about 2 years ago. You need to know the notes on your fretboard. I know people were like, oh my gosh, well, like, my favorite, Slash didn't learn it. Well, Slash doesn't play country music. But more importantly, you are never worse off for knowing something than for knowing something. So the ability to be like, all right, like, I know that's a G. I know this is a D. I know that this is a D sharp. Ability to grab notes and say, all right, I can figure things out from a music perspective. I'm not saying you have to read music, but being able to recognize the notes of the fretboard is going to help you out tremendously. Now, I created a note recognition exercise, if you will, and I took it from Steve Vai. Steve Vai is an extremely virtuoso guitar player from the 80s, if you don't know who he is. In his book, Viology, he has a chart similar to the one on screen, but he had very repeating notes all the notes repeated in different ways. So he had a G sharp and an A flat on the E string or something like that. So I wanted to simple it down a little bit because, you're not really talking about flat notes in country music for the most part. I'm going to say some very generalized things, but I'm saying them as, for the most part, when I'm saying in this video. So take everything with a little bit of grain of salt. But for the most part, you're not going to be playing a B flat note. You're going to call that an A sharp. I'm sorry, an E flat note. There you go. D flat note. You're calling that a D sharp, E flat, D sharp. You know what I'm trying to say. So being able to run through this exercise is critical. And let me show you a first little bit here. You're going to start on the B sharp on the B string, and you're going to go down. So B sharp on the B string, right there. C on the A sharp on the A, F on the A. And you're just going to go down that column, go down the next column, go down the next column until you go through the entire thing. I recorded myself doing that for 30 days when I finally learned the notes of the net. And it took between 10 and 15 minutes a day. And now I can do it pretty fast. I need to warm up a little bit sometimes, but I can do it with fairly good accuracy pretty quickly. I think I got it down to 6 minutes with about 98% accuracy. So on the first try. So highly recommend you learn the notes of the neck. And I just realized I'm talking way too fast. So I'm going to try to slow it down here a little bit. We just have a lot to get through, so I don't want to take up too much of your time. But note recognition, definitely important for learning country music. Next up, let's talk about the most important scale, the chromatic scale. The chromatic scale is literally the definition of all 12 notes in Eastern Western music. From one note all the way up to the next note, hitting everything in between. If you're thinking of a piano, you're literally going from one note and hitting every key, whether it's white or black, in between. So in this example, we'll do C. So C, C sharp, D, D sharp, E, F, F sharp, G, G sharp, A, B, A sharp, B, C. That is a chromatic scale. It's super boring and not really all that musically sounding. But it's important to know it because you need to know what notes we have available. C, C sharp, D, D sharp, E, F, F sharp, G, G sharp, A sharp, B, and C. There are no E sharps and there are no B sharps. They become F and C respectively. Important to know from a music theory perspective, just so you know what notes we're talking about. And you're like, hey, how come we're not talking about E sharp? You might hear people talk about E sharp in very complex music theory classes. We're not getting into this today. This is basic country music theory. Moving on to actually the most important scale. I know I said the chromatic scale was the most important. It's the second most important. It's fundamentally, the major scale is the most important scale of all time. If you've ever seen The Sound of Music from like grade school or whatever, it is the do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do scale. It is the backbone of all music theory. So in C, it's going to be cool thing about C is there's no sharps, there's no flats, so it's just C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C. And when you're looking at the chromatic scale, C to C, it's C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C. And the way that we think about this, and it makes more sense on on a keyboard when you talk about it, but the way to remember what notes of the major scale are, and this works for any note that you start on, is whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half. So what that means is you start on C, you're going to go up a full step, a whole step. And now a whole step is going from one note, two notes. So a half step is, so a whole step is going from C to D. And the reason they call it a whole step is because you're going from a numbered or a lettered note to the next lettered note, skipping over that sharp or that flat note in the middle. That would be considered a half note. So from C to C sharp is a half. but from C to D is a whole. So for C major, whole, C to D, whole, D to E, half, E to F. Remember, there's no sharp or flat. Whole again, F to G, whole again, G to A, whole again, G to A to B, and then half again, B back to C. So whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half. And if I'm going too fast or this is like information overload, pause the video with the thing on the screen, look at everything, practice it, save it, come back to it, rewatch it again until you get the hang of it. I promise you, once you know all this stuff that I'm about to go over today, your music theory chops will be pretty impeccable. And this will take time, so don't get frustrated if it doesn't come immediately. So now we have the major scale under our belt. Let's talk about triads. Now, triads are essentially chords, and chords are the lifeblood of music. They are a collection of notes. In this case, triad, tri meaning three. So they're a collection of three notes that make up a chord. So chords can be played after one another in a progression, which is the fundamental blueprint of any piece of music. And triads are the simplest form of chords, other than power chords, which are just two notes. That's only really prevalent in rock and in pop, punk music. But triads are very important, and they're made up of the root note, the third note of the major scale if you're having a major triad, and then the fifth of any scale. So let's take D as our example here, and we'll play it right here. And then, if we want to do whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half, you can do it this way, or you can do it this way. And we'll get to the shapes later on in the video, but just for sake of teaching, that's what that major scale looks like going this way, because you already saw it going this way. So we're looking for the 1. That's the root. The 1 is also called the root, if you didn't know. So the D. So then we're looking for the third. So 1, 2, 3. So F sharp, and we know that from our exercises earlier. And a cool trick that I forgot to mention, if you know your E and your A string notes, you also know your D and your G string notes because they're just one note behind. So if you know that this is an F sharp note, what you have to do is go up a whole step, or 2 frets in this case, so 1, 2, and then go up, down looking at the guitar, but up in pitch, 2 strings, so 1, 2, and that is your octave, F sharp, F sharp. So if you know your notes of the E string, just go over 2 strings and up 2 frets, and it's the same note. Same thing works if you're on your A string. So that's a B note. Go over 2 frets and up 2 strings. B. So we know that that's an F sharp note. And now we're looking for the fifth. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now that's an A. So we need a D, an F sharp, and an A, which makes up a D major triad. So here are the shapes based in C. Triads, they're played on 3 strings because there's only 3 notes. So you can play them on the high E, B, G string set. You can play them on the B, G, and D string set. You can play them on the G, D, and A string set, and you can play them on the D, A, and E string set. So here it is in C. You have your 5th of C, which is going to be G, your root of C, which is C, and then your 3rd of C, which is E. So now we go over here to the root inversion. Before I go any further, important to note that inversions basically just mean what note is on the bottom. So for the first example I showed you is the 2nd inversion, because the 5th is the root note, or the 5th is the lowest note, I should say. And then your root position, call it your root position because the C is the lowest note. First inversion because the 3rd is the lowest. back to the first inversion. And then, of course, it repeats again. A little high. Next string set. Next string set. And you can tell that's kind of like your basic C chord, just, you know, partial. And then your last string set. Usually we don't know the C chord to be playing this low G, but you can play it if you really, really wanted to. Just kind of sounds muddy in my opinion. And then it repeats up as high as you want it to go. So those are your major triad shapes. The cool thing about it is, you know, that's the C there, the C there. What's really cool is, does that look familiar? These are movable. That's your D shape. Without the, right? So keep that in mind. These are movable. You just gotta move it up to wherever the root is. So that's the root there. C, C sharp, D, D sharp, E, F, F sharp, G, G sharp, A, A sharp, B. Keep that in mind. Now let's move on to minor chords, minor triads specifically. Minor triads, like major triads, are a fundamental part of music. Whether it's minor or major, you got to have minor and major chords in order to make music. So instead of making your minor triad or your major triads with 1s, 3s, and 5s, the minor triads are just going to take that same scale and then flatten the 3. So it'll be your 1, your flat 3, and your 5. That's the only difference. So going back to D, so D, so have your root 2, 3. You want the flat 3, so you want F instead of F sharp, and then you're still going to have your 5 from earlier. So in order to play your D minor triad, you want D, F, and A. And this is what they look like in C. The next string set. The next string set. And the final string set. Augmented and diminished chords, they're kind of special types of chords that people will use to spice things up. If you think of like major and minor chords, it's kind of like chocolate and vanilla ice cream. Augmented and diminished chords are kind of like mint chocolate chip and pistachio. Some people absolutely love them, some people will hate them, but they do add some more flavor to your music. So in order to make an augmented triad, you basically take the 5th of the major scale and you sharpen it. And then in order to make the diminished triad, you basically take the 3rd and the 5th and you flatten them both. So in order to make an augmented triad in D, you will take your D, your F sharp, and then instead of your A, you make it an A sharp. And then to make a D diminished triad, you can take your D, your F note, because remember we flattened that earlier, the 3rd, and then you'll take your G sharp. And then these are what your augmented triads are going to look like across the string sets. If you haven't noticed already, the patterns are the same for all of them, all of the inversions, which is amazing. It makes it a lot easier to remember. Unfortunately, for the diminished side, it does not work that well. They don't repeat as cleverly as the diminished side, but you know, things you need to learn. And I'm going to be honest with you guys, I don't really play these triads that often, but there are some certain circumstances where you might want to play them. So maybe that's something that I can practice in the near future. But food for thought. All right, so major chords, we've kind of already established that they are the most important chords in all music. You can have major chords songs with no minor chords, and you can have minor chords, right? But all minor chords. You don't hear that often, but you know, very popular chord progression. You got the roots, the thirds, and the fifths. We've already established that. Harlan Howard once described country music as 3 chords and the truth, and there's still a lot of truth to that, particularly with major chords. So we've already established our first major chords in the style of triads, using only 3 notes. Now let's stack those 3 notes on top of each other and add more complex chords. You probably recognize this as the G major chord. It is made up of only 3 notes. Some of them are just repeating. So you got your G, you got your B, you got your D's, you got your G. In this case, you got your D again, and then you got your G. Some people play it like this, some people don't play it like this, some people don't play the B. It's all really preference and how you want it to sound, but it's only 3 notes. So let's go back and use D as our root again. So the D chord, you'll need a D note. You need an F sharp note. And you need an A note. Guess what? It's a D note as well. So you got D's, A, F sharp, D chord. And here are our major chords. So here's your A. I usually leave that one off, but it's still technically part of it, right? So A sharp, which let's be real here, whoever uses A sharp, but you gotta really try there. You got your B. I usually just simplify it, since, you know, playing electric guitar, not acoustic guitar, but you know, good to know. You got your C's. Your C sharp, which is kind of a bit of a stretch. You play the whole thing. I usually just kind of simplify it to this, but the C sharp isn't there. You got your D. You got your D sharp. You have your E. You have your F. Bar chords are kind of hard, so I just kind of simplify it to that. Sometimes I don't. Your F sharp. Your G. And your G sharp is technically, I mean, you can play it like this. I don't like playing it like that. I never play like that. I play like this. But those are your major chords. Minor chords, like major chords, are among the most popular. But again, like we talked about in the triad section, your major, your flat third, and your fifth. Or your 1, 3, and 5 in the minor chords, but minor scale. But we're talking about simplification here. Major chords, country music. But just for an example, let's take our D minor scale and make the D minor chord. So 1, 3, and 5. So D, F, and A. Well, we already made that earlier, but it's here. It's like this. I like playing it here, or I especially like playing it here, and sometimes here. But these are the minor chord shapes. You should probably know some of them already, but if not, here you go. A minor. And if you didn't already notice, this is exactly, if you take away these open strings, that is our triad that we learned earlier. A sharp minor, B minor. Now C minor is interesting. I don't even bother playing it that way. It's a finger twist. I just play it like this. Same with C sharp minor. I don't even bother down here. I mean, you can learn it if you want. Maybe there's some applications. I mean, if you know the triads, that's good enough for me. And then D minor, D sharp minor, which has that added. There you go. E minor, F minor, F sharp minor. Again, G is another one of those. Do you really need to know the G shape like that? It's only really applicable here. Or you just play it like this, which is just the E minor or F minor, F sharp minor, just up. G minor shape, and then G minor, G sharp minor. Use those as you will. There are some of them that I think are good to know that they exist there, but not necessarily something that you're going to grab very often. As you'll notice in country music, a capo is actually used quite often, not because musicians don't know what they're doing, but certainly because playing an F sharp minor chord is kind of ridiculous when you can just capo at 2 and strum an E minor chord and get the same effect. So keep that in mind, but good to know. Next, let's talk about 7th chords: major 7th, dominant 7th, minor 7th, diminished 7th, and all those different jazzier chords. I say jazzier chords. Some of them are important, as 7th chords often describe movement within the song. Lots used like in turnarounds. And essentially what it is, it's just a major or minor chord with the 7th degree added on top of it as an extension. Adds a little bit more flavor to it. So in the case of D major 7th, you have your D, you have your F sharp, you have your A, and you have your C sharp. And then your D, of course. So. Nice little arpeggio for you. So in the case of D major 7th, you have your D note, which is your root, your F sharp, your 3rd, your A, which is your 5th, and then your C sharp, which is your D, which is your 7th note, and then your root back to D. So when playing 7th chords, because there's 4, I typically only play those 4 notes because you can't really fret anything else because you only have 4 fingers really to fret. Most people only have 4 fingers to fret. So this is how I play them. This is all with the root on the E string. So let's switch over to G just to show you, because if I do it in D, I'll run out of room. I just want to show you that you can play in multiple spots. So you got your G 7th, also known as your G dominant 7th. So you have your G. You can tell that you got some flats. And you got some sharps going on here, all these different versions for different chordal shapes, and I'll explain that here in a minute. But G7 chord right here. And of course, you can play it up here. And your normal G major 7 chord looks like this. Really jazzy, right? Also play it way up here. These fingerings are unusual if you're not used to playing them, so do practice them, spend some time with it, get them underneath your fingers, and then you have your G minor 7. I get up here. Now, you can replace major chords and minor chords with 7 chords. We'll get into that theory later on down the line. But for now, just know these shapes. Let's take a look at the A string, the root on the A, and now that you really think about it, I guess I could have done it in D since the G here is only once here, but looks like this. On paper, it looks like you need to do it like this, but I just bar this right here, and then I like that better than the low E string. I don't know, it just feels more natural to me. G7, and then G major 7. Sharpen that 7 back to the natural 7. And then minor 7, flatten that 3rd. Let's move on to the root on the D string. And here we go. That's up there high. Let's go back to the dominant, major 7. And then your minor. And I'm using my fingers here. You can strum it, right? I don't want you to think that you can only use your fingers. I just find it easier when I'm only playing 4 strings. So those are 7th notes. Next up we're going to talk about is arpeggios. And arpeggios is just a fancy way of saying that you're plucking the chords instead of strumming it. So you take your basic C major chord, like that. That's strumming it. If you wanted to do something cool and arpeggiate it, it would sound like this. You're literally just plucking the notes of the chord. And that works for chords. It also works for triads. Shout out if you're a real one, if you know what that is. But they can also be used to play in, different parts of the neck that's not necessarily triads or chords. You can use them to play scales. Kind of sounds like the Stranger Things thing, right? But you got your 1, you got your 3rd, you got your 5th, you got your 7th, and you got your 1. It's musical. It's a good exercise as well. Basically, something that you can start practicing and so arpeggios can be played anywhere on the neck. They can be played in chords, in triad form, scale form. It's literally just any chord, any note that's within a given chord is an arpeggio. So here's some arpeggio ideas. G major 7th chord. Let's take that and invert it to the next first inversion. Let's take it to the second inversion. And take that to the third inversion because we have that 7th note. An arpeggio with its root note on the A string and G major, of course. The second inversion. crazy fingering there. And your third inversion. And finally, your root position. And lastly, starting on the D string. Mind you, I'm only kind of going up one octave here because there's not enough string space to go up 2 octaves like the other ones. But here it goes, starting on the D string. And the third inversion. The root position. Hopefully you're starting to see some patterns here, as there are patterns in music, particularly with the guitar and, you know, arpeggios. So, I mean, all music has patterns, but hopefully you're picking up on them. And now moving on to the first inversion. Next up, we're going to talk about the cage system. Now, the cage system is what truly unlocked the fretboard for me. The cage system is just a useful method of organizing all styles of music, basically organizing shapes, notes, scale patterns, riffs, anything you can think of. It's a way to organize and visualize the fretboard, all formed around the basic C, A, G, E, and D, spells out caged, shapes. It's important to know we're not only talking about those 5 chords, but we're talking about those chord shapes. So these chord shapes can be moved up and down. Important to think about when you're thinking about chords, caged shapes, is view this nut as your finger fretting it down. If you visualize it that way, it will make so much more sense. So we'll take your C chord. Now visualize your fingering right there. Now play it, which is going to be difficult if you haven't really practiced this and you're only used to playing it one way. But now you can slide this up and down the neck anywhere you want. So say you wanted to play an F chord, but using the C shape, it'd be like this. So it sounds like an F, right? Or say I wanted to play it in A. So that's C, A. Picture that. A, A sharp, B, C. You know A. G is a little weird. I usually don't use G. I just kind of take off this upper 2, or maybe only play the upper 2. You have to go so far. E is another easy one. E, F, F sharp, G, and then D. D, E, F. Anyways, it's a really unique way of organizing everything, and you know where all those shapes, because you know the C, A, G, E, and D shapes. Now you just have to kind of think of them differently without the nut. So this is what all those shapes look like. We're only playing C chords, but we're going to use the different shapes. So your normal C chord, like that. Now let's play a C chord using the A shape, like this. See how, like, if we envision this was the fret, or the nut, and you fret there like a normal A, or if you put a capo right there, C. Now let's talk about G. So like a normal G chord, it'd be like this. Like I said, that's crazy. There's no reason to do that. I usually just play it like this. Play the A shape, and then add this from the G shape. If you know Rascal Flatts. See, it's country. This is why you do it. This is literally the intro to Life is a Highway, is literally the F G chord from the cage system, but simplified. Anyways, just a helpful example in case you're like, oh, why would I ever need to use that? Rascal flats. Did G. Now let's do E. Well, we already did E. Okay, we're doing it in C, not G. E. Just like your E chord, right? But up there at the C note. And then the D shape, which is like this. I think it's kind of, you'd probably do it like this as a triad. But I really like to do it this way. And I call this kind of like the Dave Matthews crash into me chord. Because if you go back to E, he's just using different bass lines, but he's playing the E chord with the D cage shape. So I find it very useful. Another cool thing is it also works on minor chords. So you can play minor chords up and down the neck. Kind of like we talked about with minor chords in the normal shape. Some of them aren't necessarily useful. Maybe more useful as triads. Like the C one. C1 I don't use a whole lot often. A-shape one, use all the time. A minor, A minor, C minor, D minor, E, F minor. That one I find is super useful. Again, the G one, maybe good for arpeggios, but that's too much of a stretch. I mean, get out of here. E minor shape, very useful. Use that one all the time too. Especially this kind of like half inverted one, but or not half inverted one, half of the E minor one, and then D minor also fairly straightforward as well. Again, you can move them up wherever you want. So you're in C, C sharp, D. You're back in G minor, A minor, F minor. So that's going to take a while because they're different. They're different chords that you're used to just strumming cowboy chords, but they're the same shape. It's just that you always had the nut to worry about it for you. So what I found was super useful and helpful for me learning this. We'll get into that later. Next up, let's talk about the pentatonic scales. Now, the pentatonic scales are usually the first scale that people know, and it's usually A minor pentatonic. It's that scale right there. That's usually what people say, hey, I want to learn how to solo. People learn the A minor, and it's always A minor because it's just like, that's like the natural place your hand goes to grab the guitar. It's that scale right there. But pentatonic scale is a simplified version of the major scale, or minor scale, depending on if it's major or minor pentatonics. So the major pentatonics uses 5 notes because penta means 5 in Latin instead of the 7. And the 5 notes of the major scale are the 1, 2, 3, 5, and 6. It omits the 4 and the 7th. So in the case of the G major scale, you have G, A, B, D, E, G. That is your G major scale. So here are your major pentatonic scales tied to the cage shapes that we learned earlier. So here it is in C. In A. Your G shape. your E shape, and your D shape. And the reason why I tie them to the shapes is because if you know you're playing a C like this, and you're like, I want to play a major pentatonic. I don't want to hop all the way over here to play the one that everybody knows because it's the first one you know. But you're like, all right, I'm playing over here. Let's go a little bridgy, right? Because we're playing country music. All right, I'm playing the C shape of the D shape of a C chord. Where's my D shape pentatonic? Oh yeah, it's. That way you don't have to go hunting down to the, your normal box. You can just check it out, what's over here, what's unique about this part of the neck, and not have to move that far. Guess what? Same thing works for minor pentatonics. Cool thing about minor pentatonics, major pentatonics, they're the same shapes, they're just different orders, right? So for C minor, you have which you'll probably recognize as the exact same shape as the D major pentatonic shape, just bumped it up one bit. So your A is now your A minor pentatonic shape. Your G shape. Your G minor pentatonic shape. Your E minor pentatonic shape, which you'll recognize as the normal box, right? And of course the D shape for the minor pentatonics. So cage scales are very similar to cage pentatonics and cage chords. It's just a way of thinking about the major and minor scales up and down the neck in the same fashion. Think of them kind of like cheat codes where you can play your favorite riffs, solos, chord progressions up and down the neck. So like something like pesky B string, right? So again, like the other cage notes, they use the C's shapes, the A shapes, the G shapes, the E shapes, and the D shapes. The way that I learned all this cage stuff really easy was 2 songs. It was Sample in a Jar by Fish, jam band. Those are only 4 chords, but they're played up and down the neck in cage fashion. But what really drove it home for me was learning Franklin's Tower by the band Grateful Dead. And they use the upper portion of many of the chord shapes. So you have a D. The song goes from A, G to D, G, A, G. I'm like, that didn't sound exactly right. So I learned cage, and I'm like, all right, so I know A here, and this is just a fragment, a triad, if you will, of the E shape, but I'm doing it this way. And I went, so A, D to, so this is the E shape there, and then this is the C shape for a D. just without that root. So I'm like, okay. That sounds closer than... So you ever heard like chord progressions where you're like, all right, so the A seems higher in pitch than the G, so it can't be there, and the D sounds the lowest in pitch. That sounds the highest there, so it can't be there. That's better, but the D's still wrong, so maybe it's... That's the A. So that's A right there. It's a D chord, but it's the A shape, right? I'm like, oh, that's a lot of movement, so maybe it's something like... So you're playing the A chord in the D shape, the C chord, or the G chord with a C shape, and then the D chord with an A shape. It's not confusing at all. And my hand's not moving at all, right? Like, all right, that's pretty close. My hand's not moving at all, but maybe I try one more step further, and I'm like... It's just another way of being able to play chords up and down the neck. It is great. I absolutely love it. From a country perspective, you're probably like, what the heck? Like, that's not country at all, but like, if you do something like this... That was thinking in cage, right? Because like, if I had a backing track, it'd be, you know, E, E, E. Anyways. Think about it, like I said, you're going to be a lot better off if you know those and you can play your chords wherever you want, because you can also arpeggiate those, right? And when we get to the technique, we can talk about like banjo rolls, right? So you can also cageify your scales. Here it is in the C shape for C major. And the A shape. The G shape. The E shape. And, of course, the D shape. As you can probably tell, very similar to the pentatonics, just adding a few more notes. You can also do the same with the minor scale. And in the A, do it in the G shape. The E shape. And of course the D shape. Caged anything. Caged is just a simple way of navigating the fretboard. And the last thing I'll say about cage is knowing the notes, the shapes, and the corresponding scales and pentatonic scales that go with it will make navigating and traversing the fretboard so much easier, so you don't have to go hunting for a certain shape that you know really well. If you can pair up those scales, pentatonic scales, minor scales, all those scales with the shapes, you'll be in a great place. Like I said, pentatonics, caged, scales, they all go hand in hand. The cage system is just a way to navigate the fretboard. All right, next we're going to talk about the blues scale. Now the blues scale is very popular in blues music. Of course, blues-driven rock and roll as well. But it's also popular in country music because you're going back and forth between major and minor in country music. Blues scale helps bridge that gap. But also, country music also has inspiration from rock and roll music as well as pop music. As every genre kind of pulls from one another. The Bakersfield Sound was one of the first country acts, if not the first country act to start pulling from rock and roll as well. So knowing the blues scale will help you in your country playing journey. If you came from a blues background, you're probably familiar with it, but essentially it combines the major pentatonic and the minor pentatonic, follows the major pentatonic scale form, but just adds a sixth note, so it's no longer pentatonic, it's blues scale, and it adds that flat third. So you're having a chromaticism between the second note and the third note. So you have 2, flat 3, and 3. And that flat third is the blues note in a major blues scale setting. In a minor context, the minor blues scale, it's the same thing except for it adds that flat fifth instead. So it's the flat fifth and the fifth. And it follows the minor pentatonic scale. In C, your C major blues scale sounds like this. And the A shape. The G shape. The E shape. And the D shape. Same can be said for the minor blues scale. Here it is in C. And the A shape. The G shape. The E shape. And the D shape. So the next thing I want to talk about is the chords of the major scale. Now, the major scale, which we learned earlier, do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do, 1 through 7, they have corresponding chords that go with the scale degrees. So your root will always be a major chord. Your fourth and your fifth will always be a major chord. In the key of G, your C, and your D chords will always be major. Alternatively, your twos, your threes, and your sixes, your seconds, thirds, and sixes. So A minor, B minor, and E minor, which you can already guess, it's always going to be minor. And your seventh is always going to be diminished. So let's play our normal G major scale. Now you can play the scales but with chords. So G minor, C minor. And unlocking that is literally a music theory superpower. You can figure out the key to any song, any chord progression. What we're about to learn here next is in modes, and it's important to know that the chords and the scales and the scale degrees and the chords within the scales, because the first note of a song, first chord of a song, isn't necessarily always the key. It is the home base, but it's not the key necessarily. And that's why we're coming into knowing the chords for each of the scale degrees. So you see something where you're like, all right, I have an E minor chord, C, G, E, or D. Here we go. 6, 4, 1, 5. And once you resolve the 1, if you're like, oh, you're in E minor. You're not in E minor. You're actually in G. Which is nice because G is the relative major of E minor, but you're in the key of G. G is your home base. So we're going to talk about modes here in a second, and that should unwrap or unmystify some of those mysteries there. But learning the chords of the major scale, super, super helpful in unlocking a lot of music theory and figuring out key signatures, figuring out what to play when, etc. So learn the chords of the major scale. Next, we're going to talk about modes, and modes sound super scary for most music theory, but I promise you it is a lot easier than people make it out to be, and I'm going to try to demystify it here. Let me know in the comment section below after you hear this part if I was successful. I'll remind you afterwards. But a mode is a variation of the major scale that starts on any scale note. They tend to mystify guitar players, so revise this frequently until you get this part down. But there are 7 notes in the major scale, like we've previously been discussing. There are also 7 modes in the major scale. Just as everything is leading up to this point builds on top of one another. It's important to remember that the corresponding note and numbers of the chords, because they will be important to modes. So the section that we just learned about the corresponding chords to the notes of the major scale is going to be important. So make sure you master that before coming to modes. It will make a lot more sense. So in simplest term, a mode is talking about your normal scale. Let's say it's in G major and you're starting on a different note but playing the same notes as G major. In simplest terms, or at least the simplest terms that I can break it down, is a mode is taking your normal major scale, but instead of playing it on the root note and playing it all the way through, you're actually starting on a different note within that scale. So let's say G major scale. G major. But let's start that same scale, but let's start on the A note. So it's that is literally a mode. It's called A Dorian because it's the second. It starts on the second. So. Oops. You might be thinking to yourself, wait a second, Ryan, that doesn't resolve. It tends to want to go back to G. And it does. But if you play that same scale over an A minor chord, so let's see if I can go. You're like, okay, now it's starting to sound like it resolves there, right? And the reason why we did A minor is because what we learned earlier is that we know the A always goes with the minor chord. So when we're talking about A Dorian, A Dorian is a mode within G. It just has that A minor home bass. Kind of like when we talked about earlier when we had that E minor to C to G to D. A was like kind of the home note, but the key was in G, so that's actually that was actually an E Aeolian. Yes, E Aeolian. It was in the key of G, but you can also think of it as E Aeolian. Can be E minor, E Aeolian, because the home bass, the home note is the tonal center is E minor, but the key signature is still in G. So when you play that chord progression, you can play the E major scale and solo over it with the E minor pentatonic scale, which is also subsequently the same thing as the G major pentatonic scale. Hope you figured that out already by yourself, because E minor pentatonic is the same as the G major pentatonic. Same notes, just a different home setting here. So when we're talking about modes, we're still talking about the same notes, the same key signature as G, but starting on A, with A being our tonal and home center. So like I said, modes is a scary word, but it doesn't have to be. Think of it this way, it's just the major scale, but we're starting and ending on a different spot. And each of these different spots, the scale degrees of the major scale, have different corresponding modal names and modal chords. Like we talked about earlier with the modal chords, G will always be major, C will always be major, D will always be major, A will always be minor, B will always be minor, E will always be minor, and F will always be, F sharp will always be diminished when we're talking about modes. So when we're talking about modes, G, the root, whatever, it's always going to be called Ionian. These are Greek words, but just basically means like, hey, like we're playing in G Ionian. If you ever hear that, we're playing in G major. And G's the key signature, but it's also the home bass, so you're good there. Going to our second note, A, always going to be minor, and it's going to be called A Dorian. B is going to be called Phrygian. It's going to be the third. It's always going to be a minor chord. C is Lydian, major. D is Mixolydian. You've probably heard that one before. E is Aeolian, and F sharp is Locrian, and that's going to be the diminished chord. So come back to this a few times. It took me a couple of weeks to finally click, but it will help you understand chord progressions. It will help you understand key signatures. The best way that I figured this out was through the Whipping Post by the Allman Brothers. The chord progression is A minor, B minor, C, D minor, A minor, D minor, C, D minor, A minor. And I always were like, why does A pentatonic not sound perfect there? A minor pentatonic. And it's because the key is not in A minor. It is not an A minor song. It's an A minor mode because you're playing A minor to B minor to C to B minor, A minor. And I'm choosing this song on purpose is because we're literally in the key of G. And that's why E minor pentatonic works so well because it's G major pentatonic, right? You're just trying to think of it in A minor. It is a modal chord progression. A minor. Think of it as an A Dorian modal chord progression. And the chords typically dictate what mode it is. It's just, A minor is your home bass, and that is within the key of G. So hopefully that was a helpful example. If not, if it's confusing, let me know down below in the comment section, and I'll try to clarify that for you. Because, like I said, if this is hurting your head, it hurt mine too. But once you start applying it, it'll become so much easier. Let's take the example of Franklin's Tower earlier that we used. So A to G to D. And I know we're probably thinking like, Ryan, we're talking about country music. Why are we bringing up the Grateful Dead? Well, in case you didn't know, Jerry Garcia was a huge Bill Monroe bluegrass mandolin player. And he actually played banjo in bluegrass bands well before he started the Grateful Dead. He wanted to play banjo in Bill Monroe's band. That was like his life dream before he started the Dead. So there is a lot of country music and bluegrass music within the Grateful Dead. So that's why I keep on bringing this up, and because it's like my favorite style of music outside of country. It helps teaching modes better too. Because not all country uses modes, but some does. Some of them are more rock and stuff, but it's good to know. So going back to Franklin's Tower, A, G, and D. Initial reaction is, oh, it's an A. But that falls apart the second you look at the A major scale. A, B, C sharp, D, E, F sharp, and G sharp. For one, we know for sure that is an A. For sure that's a G chord. Now, it doesn't go A to G minor. Right? So, and G doesn't exist in the A major scale, so it can't be an A. Well, maybe it's in G. Well, we already established that A is minor in G, so it can't be in G either. So it can't be in G, it can't be in A. What if it's in D? D, so let's see, D, E, F sharp, G, A, B, C sharp, D. So you get your D, your A, and your G, and D happens to be the root, A happens to be the fifth, and G happens to be the fourth, and those are all major because that's what we learned earlier, the notes and the chords on the major scale. So actually, Franklin's Tower is in D, even though D's the last middle note, right? And that's because we're playing in Mixolydian. A happens to be the home chord, the fifth chord, which is the Mixolydian. And Mixolydian happens to go with a lot of jam band and rock and roll music, so that makes sense. So that's a good way of applying the modes to figure out key signatures, knowing what to play, because when you know the chords, you know what key you're in, you know what scales to solo over, you know what chords to use, you know what chords to... You know what you're needing to play. So learning modes, it's a little bit of daunting, but once you start applying it, it becomes really easy, and things start clicking in your head. You're like, oh, okay, I'm starting to get it now. So now we know about modes a little bit more. We know what key we're in. We know what the chords are. We know it's kind of a Mixolydian chord progression. Now we need to know of what notes we play. We know that the D major scale is going to work, especially when we're highlighting the chord tones. That's a very country thing to do. So if we're here, we want to highlight the A notes, G, notes of the D chord, notes of the G chord, notes of the A chord. So what we can start doing is playing over the chord. So we start playing the pentatonics. Or you can start playing what's known as the 3 notes per string scales. And those are more tied to the modes, but it's helpful. It's another helpful way to break out of the boxes and help traverse the neck a little bit more fluidly. So let's talk about those real quick. 3 notes per string system is another way to visualize the guitar, like I just mentioned. Depending on who you ask, some say it's superior to the cage system. Some people say it is inferior. Me personally, I use both. I think both are very helpful and useful for their own kind of degrees, whether it's soloing, improvising, etc. So where cage is based off of the chordal shapes, the 3 notes per string system is based off of the 3 notes per string patterns, hence the name. And the 3 notes per string is often used to reverse the neck from one end all the way to another. And I find it easier to play the modes with the 3 notes per string. So like anything, you're always better for knowing more information than less. The cool thing about the 3 notes per string scale is it uses the modal names for the different shapes. So going back to G, it looks like this. This is G Ionian shape. Major scale, right? So that's your G major scale. Next scale is the A Dorian scale. Now, mind you, this is still in the key of G, so all the notes will be the same that we just played. You're just starting on the A note. So you did the first one here on the G note, now you're starting here on the A note. And again, it's the same notes as the G major scale, it's just here on this position of the neck. So you can literally go in between like a... So that was a quick little improvised, wasn't that great, but a quick little improvised between the G Ionian and the A Dorian shapes of the G major scale. So next one is going to be B Phrygian. So we did a G Ionian, A Dorian, B Phrygian. Oops, B Phrygian. Later on, if you want some more advanced music theory, we can put those chords behind it and you can start hearing the different sounds of the different modes. Right now, we're just thinking of modes of how to navigate and traverse and use that across the fretboard in a country setting. So if you're interested in more deeper dive into modes, leave a comment down below. Next is going to be C Lydian to go up to the C note, and we're going to play this. D Mixolydian. E Aeolian. And F sharp Phrygian. And it repeats itself all over again. And that's just an easy way, if you learn those shapes, easy way to start soloing from here all the way up to here without really having to think about it. Today we're going to be talking about country guitar techniques that you need to learn how to play in order to play country music. There are a lot of different techniques and some that are very particular to only country music that will really elevate your playing to make you sound more like you're chicken picking like Brent Mason or Brad Paisley or just playing like some of the Nashville players. There's some techniques that make songs that sound pretty easy to play, a little bit more complicated, or, you know, it makes it a little bit easier depending on how well you know these techniques. So here are the main country guitar techniques that you need to learn how to play in order to play country music. Let's get into it. All right, so before we get started, pay no attention to this. This is just so you guys can see what I see on the fretboard. I'm gonna try something new. Let me know if you like it or not. Second thing that we're gonna talk about. There's quite a few different techniques that you need to learn how to play in order to play country music. Country music is very percussive, especially with chicken picking. So we're not going to go over every technique. There are some more advanced stuff like the Travis picking, which we're not going to cover today, mainly because it's not in most country music and I don't know how to do it. But there are a lot of good techniques in here that you need to learn, particularly hybrid picking and chicken picking. That's probably the #1 country guitar technique that you need to learn how to play in order to play country music. I'm going to show you how to do it and then demonstrate it once. But if you want a longer demonstration, I'll have a link in the description box below to my second channel that goes over full-length versions. It's where the QR codes go if you buy the book. So check that out down below if you are interested. And by no means is this list exhaustive. If there are more techniques that you think are more important and should be included, let me know in the comment section below. And let's get on with the strumming section first. So first up is your basic strumming technique. You're probably familiar with this one if you've played any guitar before, but if this is your first foray into guitar playing, first thing you gotta do is strum downwards. What you wanna do is take your pick. This is the top of the guitar, this is the bottom of the guitar, and you're literally gonna take the strings and strum downwards right here like this. Big old G string, down. Alternatively, we're gonna talk about up stroke, which is essentially the exact opposite. Start on the higher side or the lower ground side and go up. Put those two together and you're strumming. It's not the greatest chord strumming pattern, but whatever, you get the point. Downstroke, upstroke, put them together, you're strumming. The next technique we're gonna look at is called raking, and it's kind of mixing between palm muting and downstroking, and it sounds like this. And if you're curious, Sultans of Swing, the little beginning part. That's kind of what we're talking about, this part. That's what we would call raking. Moving on to picking, first we're going to talk about single note picking. It's exactly what it sounds like. You take a note and you pick it. I figured most of you guys know about it, but just in case you got some new players here, that's called single note picking. Alternatively, when you pick up and down, that's called alternative picking, like this. So what you're doing is you're picking down and then picking up right afterwards in sequential order like this, going up and down, up and down, up and down. That is called alternative picking, as opposed to just down picking like this, or just up picking. I don't know anybody who just up picks, but you know, maybe ska. But alternative picking is down pick, up pick, down pick, up pick, alternating like that. Now, tremolo picking is very similar to alternate picking. It's just really fast and it kind of sounds like a tremolo effect, kind of like this. So picking, alternate picking really fast, get that tremolo effect. Next we're going to talk about is finger picking. And I'll grab a simple chord here. Basically, instead of picking with a pick that I just dropped, you're going to use your fingers and you're going to pick there. So use any fingers you want. You actually benefit from using multiple fingers while you're picking. So if I'm going to pick this D chord, I can pick the G string with my thumb, the B string with my pointer finger, and then the E string with my middle finger. And it gets a little bit, you know, a little bit more fluid. I'm going to talk more about that here in a second. It is super important to learn how to pick with your fingers because it is a great country technique, especially going up to hybrid picking. Hybrid picking kind of comes from finger picking. You're just adding a pick and your fingers. So in that same D example, where you use the pick for the G string and then your middle finger for the B and your pinky, or I'm sorry, your ring finger for the E. So it's you want to make sure you're using the fleshy part of your finger, not your nails. And that is hybrid picking. Practice that a lot. That's going to be something very useful. And you don't necessarily have to go in order like that. You can go. the hybrid pick is going to lead you to be able to chicken pick. Now, chicken pick is the percussive things of picking that we talked about earlier. Basically, same thing with hybrid picking. You're using your pick and your two fingers, your middle finger and your ring finger. But this time you're kind of making kind of a clucking sound. The way I'm doing that is taking the B string on the 5th fret and bending it up with the pick, and then I'm alternating picking the pick and my middle finger. And I'm doing it in a way where it kind of cuts it off in between each time, so it sounds like literally a chicken clucking. A few techniques there. So learn how to hybrid pick, learn how to finger pick, and then learn how to chicken pick, because that is how you really get that country sound. You don't necessarily have to go like the alternative super fast. You can literally just go. That was alternating between pick and middle finger. Not necessarily one for one, but that's kind of chicken picking in a nutshell. Next up is banjo rolls, another important country guitar technique named after the banjo. What you can do here is either hybrid pick, or you can finger pick, or you can use your pick to pick. But essentially, you want to take a chord and you kind of go, you arpeggiate it by playing each string like that. But you do that in very fast order, kind of, and repeat it. That's what's known as a forward banjo roll. You can also do it in reverse, which is known as backwards roll. And here I'm just taking the D chord and I'm playing the B, G, and D string. And you can also alternate. You can go G, D, G, D, B. Or, alternatively backwards. That's just some banjo picking techniques to sound kind of like a banjo, and it sounds pretty country. And then the last one's called Travis picking, and it kind of mixes in hybrid picking and banjo rolls at the same time. Like I said, I'm not very familiar with the technique. I mean, I'm familiar with it, how it sounds, but I'm not, have never learned how to play it. So we're gonna save that for another time, but keep that in mind if you want to learn some country, old country, Merle Travis and Chet Atkins lines. You gotta learn how to Travis pick. Next, we're going to talk about staccato and legato. Legato essentially means when the notes merge into each other. It sounds kind of like this. Staccato is when there's kind of a break in between, so there's some, dead space in between each note. Like anything in music, mixing those two things together makes music sound more interesting and less sterile. As far as legato goes, you can also add in hammer-ons and pull-offs. Essentially what a hammer-on is you take one note, say the A on the 5th fret of the E string, and then you hammer on with another finger. Traditionally, you would use either your pinky finger or your ring finger, and you basically just want to hammer it on as you play the first note. So it sounds like this. You play the first note, and then hammer on the second note. You can also add a third note with your pinky. Or you can add that middle note with your middle finger. Or all of them above. Alternatively, you can also pull it off. But when you pull off, you want to play that first, the higher fretted note first, and you want to pull down-ish so you can ring the string a little bit. So it's kind of like, so it sounds like this. Again, you can add that fourth note. You can add the middle note. can add all 4 notes. Alternatively, you can also hammer on and pull off like this. And of course, hammer on, pull off to open strings. So practice your hammer-ons and pull-offs. Great, great technique. Next, let's talk about slides, because slides are important as well in country music. First thing you want to learn is to slide in. And when we're sliding in, we're basically coming in from lower down the neck that way, and then we're sliding into the note. So say we're going to slide from open to the B string on the high E. So you essentially want to pluck the open E string and then take your finger and fret and slide all the way in from the nut. Doesn't necessarily have to be from the nut either. It can also be like from, midway point. Alternatively, because you can slide in, you can also slide out, which means you're fretting and starting with the higher fretted strings and then going that way. So if you want to go to B to E on the high E string again. With that said, you can also slide in between different frets. So you want to go from G to B, slide in, and then slide out from B to G. And then there's things called legato slides, where the slides go together, kind of like. And then you have shift slides, which are basically when you slide different notes in different strings. So what I'm doing here is I'm going from G to B with my ring finger. And I'm taking my middle finger and going from F sharp to D. Some slides, some pull-offs, some hammer-ons right there. Bends. Bends are super, super, super useful in country music. You see them all the time. I think a guy named Jim Lill, he did like 43 bends at one point on his channel. But bends, essentially what you want to do is take a note, a fretted note, and you would take the string, and what you're doing is bending it, either by pushing it downwards or upwards to change the pitch. So it's like that. You can do bends in multiple different ways: quarter stop bends, half stop bends, whole stop bends, 1.5 stop bends, 2 whole stop bends, which is a little bit hard, and I've actually broken strings twice trying to demonstrate that. So we're not going to do that, but the basic bend is the half stop bend, and essentially what that means is you're going up from one fret to the next fret, right? So you're going from B to C. So you're grabbing the B, and you're pushing the string up until it gets up to that note. Now a quarter stop bend is when you try to go kind of in between there. So in between B and C. Quarter stop bends are usually when you're playing really fast. You don't have time to go all the way up, but it's good to know. And then a whole stop is from B to C sharp. And that's a good way to practice to see if you're in tune, is to play the note you're starting on, the note you want to go, and then bend it up. Also works really well if you have a tuner, so you can see how far you have to go. Practicing bending in pitch is going to do you a lot of favors in the long run of your musical journey. Next one is 1.5 stops, and that's kind of where I stop when it comes to bends, mainly because it's really hard to get up there. It's a little bit easier when you're up higher in the neck registry, but down here. So 1.5 means 3 full stops. So 1, 2, 3. So we're going from B to the D. I'm a little shy of not wanting to break my string again, but you got to get up there. It's a little bit easier maybe up here. Let's see. A little bit, but bends are super cool, super country. Learn your bends. So bend release is when you bend the note up and then you release it back to the original note all within one kind of motion. Sounds like this. So you want to push the note up to the bent note, and then once you let it ring out for a little bit, depending on how long you want to say something up there, then you release your finger without removing it from the string back to the normal position. And then subsequently, if you want to do a pre-bend release, that's really cool, really country as well, is you bend it up, and then you wait, and then you pick the bent note, and then release it. And if you want to get really groovy, really country with it, add some chicken picking while it's in there. You can get really country if you practice that. Next up, we're going to talk about unison bends. So unison bends is when you take one note, that's your root, and then you're taking another string and you're bending that second string up to the main root. So in this example, we're going to take this D note as our root on the B string, and we're going to take this C on the G string, and we're going to bend that up to the D using a whole stop while playing this D note at the same time, so it sounds like this. And you can hear that there's some clashing there when it's still in C and C in between, and then when it gets into D, then it becomes that unison of between that note and that note, that D and that D. So. I always like to think of this as like the Allman Brothers' Midnight Rider after the solo. You can hear the two distinct notes, and then eventually it becomes one note in itself, and that's unison bends. And then double stop bends are kind of like unison bends, or they are unison bends, but it's not when they're in unison. So like say, let's say E major pentatonic scale. We're going to take the B string and the F sharp string, and we're going to bend. Very country, and that's called a double stop bend. And that can happen anywhere that you have double stop. So you can do it right here. The last bend we're going to talk about is behind the nut bend. It kind of simulates a pedal steel guitar. So what you want to do is like take the B string, and then go take your B string behind the nut. Usually works with open strings, but now I'm out of tune, but you get the idea. You can bend the notes behind the string when you're pulling off. Give that pedal steel sound a little bit. Next up we have vibrato, and vibrato is essentially taking the string and wiggling it just a little bit, not even a quarter of a bend, but just kind of give it some more character so it swerves in and out a little bit. So this is what a basic vibrato sounds like. You can hear kind of the movement, right? And they say the cool thing about vibrato is it's kind of like each guitar player's fingerprint, where each one is slightly different, and it kind of gives its identity to each guitar player. It can be slow, kind of like this. It can be fast, kind of like this. It can be narrow, kind of like this. Doesn't change a whole lot. Or it can be kind of wide, like this. Play around with it, whatever your heart's content. Kind of your own signature sound, but make sure your vibrato is good and in tune. A lot of guitar players say it's the hardest thing to get right and to finally master, but might as well start trying now and figuring out your own sound. So now double stops are essentially when you're taking two different notes that are next to each other, maybe like in a pentatonic scale, and playing them at the same time. So here I'm taking these two notes of the E major pentatonic scale, playing at the same time, either with a pick or with your fingers. And then playing other two notes in the scale. Very country sound. Next we're going to talk about barring chords. Bar chords are usually really hard for beginners, but they are pretty important for country music, especially when you start playing arpeggios and chicken picking. And honestly, just learning how to get those notes all to ring out is a good thing to know. So here's this G bar chord. The hard part is going to be your finger. A lot of people try to play it completely flat. I have found it's easier for me when I try to use this inside flesh a little bit easier. Makes it a little bit easier for me. To be able to let that ring out all the way. It's another tool in the tool belt. Want to be able to choke off the note and also let it ring out at the same time. And speaking of that way, we're going to talk about arpeggios, which is just a fancy way of saying picking each of the individual notes of a chord. So it can be like this, that bar G chord that we just played. Or it could be, kind of like this, like a seventh chord. Arpeggios is very useful. If you are confused about arpeggios, go check out the country music theory section of the book. It'll go over that in more details, linked down below. Next, let's talk about palm muting. Palm muting is a way to dampen the strings, make it sound a little bit more aggressive, a little bit more percussive, but also is a friend when you're playing like chugging chords. Basically what you're going to do is take this fleshy, fatty part of your palm, rest it on the strings, and then strum in front of it. I typically like to do it really close to the bridge, if not on the bridge. Palm muted versus not palm muted. Just sounds a little bit tighter when it's palm muted. It's a great technique, going to be very useful in creating that percussiveness that country music requires. Next up, we're going to talk about pick scrapes, and that's essentially taking your pick, the edge of your pick, and kind of... Country music's a lot about making fun sounds, like chicken picking, or like Brad Paisley likes to use a lot of different funny sounds. And using your pick to scrape across the strings, it's just another tool in the arsenal. Next up is string skipping. String skipping is kind of like hybrid picking. It's kind of like banjo rolls. You're doing it with your pick, but essentially you're skipping a string or multiple strings in order to play. And that's going to be really useful creating different melodies and progression. The intro to Sweet Home Alabama uses string skipping, as is Needle and the Spoon by Leonard Skinner. So learn how to string skip, learn how to do it accurately and proficiently. Now, volume swells is next. Volume swells is it's more modern country, but it helps when you learn how to, play a chord and swell it in or swell it out. Basically, you want to take your finger, and it works really well on Telecasters, and turn your volume all the way down, play the chord, and then bring it up. You can add a little swell right there, right? Swell intro, and then swell outro. Little fade, and then of course you can roll it around a little bit and get a little swirly swell. Thelonious Monk said it best, is that there are no wrong choices in music. It all just happens to rely upon how you resolve it. And that is certainly true in jazz music, but it's certainly true in all kinds of different music. There are different choices within country music. There are certain choices on guitar that make things inherently more country. So in this video, we're going to talk about all the different choices that you can make and play to sound more country and add some country flair to your guitar playing. So let's get into it. Like Thelonious said, there's no really perfect, better quote for playing music other than that. It's all about how you resolve it. It's all about how you finish it. So let's get this out of the way first. There are no wrong choices when it comes to playing style. You can add a little bit of rock, you can add a little bit of metal, you can add a little bit of jazz or blues into your country playing, and that's ultimately what's going to give you your own unique style. Here are just some examples, and I think the fundamentals of the different choices that you need to make in order for things to sound more country if you want to add to your country playing or add country to your already existing playing. So we've already talked about your music theory, guitar theory, and we've talked about the techniques you need. So this whole video is going to talk about the different choices that combines the theory and the techniques that make country music sound like country music. So in the guitar theory section, we talked about the cage theory. There'll be a link up here if you're curious about caged and you want to learn a little bit more about caged. It goes over that theory. But what we're looking is combining those two, combining those caged major shapes and the caged minor shapes. Now, when I was first starting out, I would usually jump to in between the major and the minor using the exact same shape. So you can see here, these are the major and minor pentatonic shapes, the caged shapes that you should be familiar with. The gray shapes, or the gray notes, are going to be the ones that are in both the major and minor pentatonic scale at that position. The green notes are in the major, and the blue notes are in the minor. And for context, this is in C. C major and C minor. Played together, they sound like this. An important thing to note is that you can choose any of these notes, especially if you're using chromaticism. It's going to sound really, really country. You're adding some chicken picking in there, and you're adding some slaps, and so you got some like slap back delay going on. It's going to sound really, really country. Now, we learned the cage shapes, and those do apply to the open strings, but they are slightly fingered differently in a little bit of ways. And I never really bothered to learn those up until recently. So here are the shapes of the pentatonic shapes in the open position. So you can pull off and hammer on, using hammer-ons as well, and add this to your playing. It helps you practice these a little bit. I know that 5 cage shapes, they're going to be slightly different on this open position. So open position is going to add a lot of country dynamics to your playing as well. Next, let's talk about subdivisions. Subdivisions are how you break up music. A song would sound really boring if it was just quarter notes the entire time. Alternatively, if it was just alternate picking at 180 BPM of just 16th notes, that would be really boring too. Think of like Miserlou by Dick Dale. It's really cool and impressive at first, but then they switch things up because if there's no differential in the subdivisions, music gets really stale and really boring. So a way that you can really spice up your playing if it sounds kind of dull is using different subdivisions. Here we have eighth notes, quarter notes, we have triplets. So try adding different divisions within your playing, whether it's riffs, solos, chord progressions, and your playing will sound instrumentally, infinitely more interesting. So most strum patterns are just up and down. Yes, there's the ska that's just all up, like the... But for the most part, we're going up and down, and there's a rhythm to it. You want to keep that rhythm going. But you don't necessarily always have to hit the strings. So it all really just kind of depends. Use your ears on this. I know a lot of people were asking for like chord strum patterns. Just use your ear. That's really going to help sharpen your ear and get your ear into picking up musical subdivisions. Now, we've already talked about all the country techniques in a previous video, but technique definitely plays a role into the choices that you make that sound country. Slides and bends are definitely country, especially double stop bends or double stop slides. But certainly chicken picking. Chicken picking, hybrid picking is also going to be really, really country. So check out that video if you haven't already and you want to add some country techniques to your playing, because country techniques, between the choices and the techniques, is really what makes country sound country. Now, I got this idea from another country guitar player, but it's how you can make your way around the fretboard and get out of playing pentatonic boxes, and that is to play arpeggios going up and then use scales going down. So what I mean by that is this. It's a great way to learn how to play over the changes, very popular in jazz, in country, and it helps feel the music a little bit better and get out of that pentatonic box. Now, another huge country technique is thirds and sixths. It's that classic country turnaround like this. That is sixths, and then this is thirds. You can tell from the thirds, it sounds like a lot of country intros and some signature licks. And then the sixths sound like that classic country turnaround. So you can add those flares to your musical choices, sound instantly more country. And you can either pick them all together at the same time, alternate it, chicken pick one, pluck the other, add some variable dynamics and some divisions, and you will be sounding super interesting and super country. Speaking of dynamics, dynamics is also very important when it comes to country music. Country music is very percussive, but that doesn't mean you always have to be hitting as hard as you can. You need to have a light touch as well. What I found is the best way to work on your touch is to crank up your volume as much as you can. If you're in a house, crank up that master as loud as you can. If you have like neighbors or something like that, maybe you can put on some headphones. If you have an amp modeler, loud as you can tolerate without your ears hurting, and then play as hard as you can. And that will get you used to playing hard. That part shouldn't be that difficult. The difficult part will be now to try to make it sound as quiet as possible without turning down the volume and without turning down your guitar's volume. Do it all with your touch. Try to see how soft you can make it sound. And that will get your mind thinking about dynamics and how much something soft feels versus something hard feels. And you would, like everything else I've been talking about, vary that up throughout your musical playing. Makes it a little bit more interesting. And the next choice is the gear you use. Of course, I'm using a Fender Telecaster-esque guitar, which is undoubtedly a country instrument, but you can twang it up on a bunch of other different things. I've seen plenty of videos that show people chicken picking on Les Pauls. I played Don Rich's Buckaroo on a metal guitar with a dual rectifier. Did it sound inevitably country? I mean, it sounded like Buckaroo, but it wasn't entirely country. So gear choice does matter to a certain extent. Technique in your choices matter a lot more, but gear does matter. So the first things first is we got to talk about guitars. Now there are a few guitars that are more iconically country than other guitars, but in this day and age, it really seems that everybody just kind of uses what kind of guitar that they have lying around and then uses the more country mindset. But with that said, the first and foremost guitar everybody knows from country music is the Fender Telecaster. The Fender Telecaster is the oldest solid body electric guitar, and it is the oldest country guitar as well, mainly because Leo Fender was advertising these guitars to country and western and swing players back in the 50s. And said that Leo went around Southern California, Bakersfield scene, all those good places, and would talk to country guitarists and ask them what they really needed and what they needed to sound bigger over the swing bands that they were playing in. So when we're thinking guitars in country music, we're thinking the Fender Telecaster. Now this is a Fender body, neck made by Warmoth, so it's not entirely Fender, but it is definitely the idea that matters. A single twangy bridge pickup. Mine has steel saddles and a single coil neck. It has what Brad Paisley says, the cutting board with strings on it. So Fender Telecaster is definitely the most iconic guitar when we're talking country music. The next guitar we're going to talk about is the Fender Stratocaster. Now, while the Fender Telecaster might be the most iconic country guitar, I would think that most people, when they say what does an electric guitar look like, are usually thinking of this shape right here. It is the evolution of the Telecaster, if you will. Bridge, middle, and neck pickups. We got 3 pickups with a 5-way blade. It still has that same length, and you know, you can get pretty snappy. Many country players in the 80s certainly rocked a Stratocaster, especially in that Nashville sound music space. But if you go and look at some Garth Brooks live videos, you will see him rocking a Strat. So there's nothing wrong with doing some twanging on a Stratocaster. It just comes down to technique, more so on the Strat than the Telecaster if you're looking for that country spank. But another iconic country electric guitar. Now the next guitar we're going to talk about, it's actually kind of 3 guitars in one, and that is the Gibson guitar. This is a Gibson Les Paul. Actually, this is a Sakai knockoff of a Gibson Les Paul, but we're talking Gibson Les Pauls, we're talking SGs, and we're talking 335s. And I've kind of lumped these all together because they have something that the other 2 guitars that we've talked about so far don't, and that is humbucking guitars. Now Gibson might be made in Music City. The electric guitars haven't always necessarily been country music. Certainly the acoustic guitars, the Mockingbird and the Jumbos, always have been a staple in country music. But when it comes to Les Pauls, ES33, 335s, and SGs, it seems to be more of a modern introduction into the country music space, particularly in the 2000s when things got a little bit more rockin'. But if you look at any of the session guys from Tom Bukovac to even guys like Jim Lill, Guthrie Trapp, they're always talking about having complementary guitars on tracks, whether it's a Telecaster or a Strat for one part, and then a complementary humbucking guitar for another part. So Gibson Les Pauls, Epiphones, single cut guitars, very, very country. Now the next guitar we're going to talk about, I don't have one. I kind of use my Stratocaster in this place, but it is a Fender Jazzmaster. And in 2015, when Chris Stapleton blew us all away with Justin Timberlake, the Jazzmaster has been certifiably a country instrument from the king of country, Chris Stapleton himself. Now, I don't know many other guitar players who are considered country who play Jazzmasters, but the things that Chris Stapleton does with the Jazzmaster, that makes it not only country, but it's almost like Southwestern music, especially off that Traveler record. I mean, there's just so much beautifulness in that richness of the sound that it's hard not to say, hey, if you want to play some country music and all you have is Jazzmaster, nobody's going to look at you funny. Not ever since Chris Stapleton. The next guitar we're going to talk about, it's the Wolfgang. It's kind of more of the shredding style guitar. This is a PRS Standard 24, originally in cherry red, but it's kind of faded quite a bit, which is actually quite nice. And then I also have one of these Richardson 6s by Ernie Ball. We're talking about a real shred machine. And the reason why we're talking about these is because, and I really want to focus on the idea that the gear matters to a certain extent, but not as much as you think. Look at the guys from Jason Aldean's band. Kurt Allison, and I can't remember the other guy's name. Let me know in the comment section below. Help me out here. But they rock PRSs. They rock Eddie Van Halen guitars. They rock, some pretty rock and metal-ish guitars. And nobody's doubting that Jason Aldean isn't country. Sure, it is a lot more rock influenced. Maybe you think like guys like Brantley Gilbert certainly is more heavy metal rock influence than the neo-traditional honky tonk Telecaster sounds. But country music is in a really cool spot where it's pulling inspirations from literally everywhere, from Five Finger Death Punch to Drake and modern rap and R&B. It's a really cool time to be in country music, and as such, the gear that you're using, as long as it fits your style, and you can make what you'll make out of it, and you'll hear some sounds here in a second of these actually can sound pretty country. Suffice to say, if you find a guitar that fits your vibe, you can make it twang up a little bit. Now, the Firebird is an interesting one. I can only really think of two people who play a Firebird. It's Clay Cook from the Zac Brown Band and John Osborne from the Brothers Osborne. But if you walk into any bar in Nashville, particularly down in the kind of the more touristy honky-tonk sections, it won't be long until you start hearing a Lynyrd Skynyrd song. And what is more iconic guitar shape than a Firebird when we're talking Freebird and Lynyrd Skynyrd? So Firebird, definitely a twanging machine. And then the last guitar we're going to talk about is the Gretsch. This is the Country Gentleman, after Chet Atkins, Mr. Country himself. Now, while Chet Atkins is more known for his kind of jazz, sophisticated Chet picking, the hybrid Travis picking style stuff, as well as being producers for essentially the entire 80s of the country Nashville sound, record sound. He's a phenomenal guitar player, and you would be hard pressed to say, Gretsch are pretty country instruments as well. I don't own a Gretsch, probably won't ever. Not really of interest to me. I like the idea of a hollow body PRS style instead, but that's just me. If you have a Gretsch, don't be afraid to play some country music on it. Nobody's going to turn their heads. And that's kind of suffice to say, like, whatever guitar you have, if you have a country mindset, you can make anything sound country. I want to talk about one more thing, and then we're going to get into playing some passages that are all the same, but on these different guitars, so you can hear as long as you know what you're doing with your fingers and your technique, you can make anything sound country. And the last thing I want to talk about is the G bender and the B bender. It all started with Clarence White and Gene Parson from the Byrds. They wanted to get a pedal steel-like sound out of their guitars, so they came up with this idea called the bender. And you can either move it for the G or the B depending on your make and model. And what it essentially does is it takes that string and it can pull it any way up from a half tone up to, I think, 1.5 full tones of pitch, whether it's on the G string or the B string. And it really does help get that pedal steel sound. So very, very country. You can see them a lot, mainly on Stratocasters and Telecasters, mainly Telecasters. But if you ever play a G bender or a B bender, just know that is a country music machine. So with that said, let's hear some clips of me playing some just classic country lines through all these guitars, just so you can get an understanding that, hey, like, it's not necessarily the guitar that makes the sound, but it's your fingers and your tips. But there are certain guitars that do portray a certain image, and unfortunately, when you're playing live music, you definitely want a certain image, especially if you're in a country band. So let's hear those clips, and we'll get on to the rest of the video. Now, if guitars are what you put your heart and soul into, amplifiers are what takes your dreams and make them into realities. And I have a very strong opinion about this, that there are only really three types, three flavors of guitar amps that you really need to make country music. And I'm going to be talking about more so brands and actual models here. And those three flavors of amp modelers are the Fender Clean, the Vox Chimey, and then the Marshall kind of overdriven sound. And I think if you have those three sounds, whether it's from a traditional amp modeler, from a traditional tube amp, or anything and everything in between, plugins, I think you can't go wrong, and I think you can play most music with those three amp model styles. So let's first talk about the Fender Clean amp style. So when we're talking clean country amps, we're talking Fender Twins, Fender Deluxes, Fender Bassmans, which are kind of modeled after Marshalls, which we'll get to in a second. But if you really want to think of country music, it's usually through a clean Fender amp. Ask anybody from John Osborne to Brent Mason to Don Rich, literally all of those guys and in between, they're all playing clean Fender style amplifiers. And I personally think with a Fender Deluxe and some pedals, you really can make any sound that we're going to talk about today going forward. So I think the most versatile amp you can think of when it comes to country music is a clean Fender amp. Now, while the Fender style amps kind of have the king of country sound locked down, I think Vox also has a very prestigious place amongst chicken pickers in particular, especially fast guys like Jerry Donahue, Brad Paisley, John Jorgensen, Kenny Vaughn. All the really, really fast chicken picker guitar slingers in country music seem to be rocking Vox amplifiers. I'm not sure why. That just seems to be something that I've noticed. It's very chimey. It's a very different style. But British music, British amplifiers can make pretty American country music sound great. So check out a Vox if you're into the more fast chicken picking stuff. And then the last style is the Marshall style. Now, Marshalls have a huge range of amplifiers. Fender seems to be more on the clean side. Vox seems to be more kind of like in the brighter, cleaner side as well. But Marshalls can go from anything from the clean JTM 45s all the way up to the dual rectifier stuff. So I'm talking Marshalls. I'm talking more of the Marshall Crunch, kind of more modern stuff, where early 2000s, even maybe late 90s, kind of introduced the more rockin' sound. Heck, we even have guys like Jason Aldean's band who was playing through 5150s by Eddie Van Halen, which are clones, or not clones, but copies, inspirations of Marshall amps. So who says country can't rock? I think everybody agrees that country can rock. So if you're looking for a more rockin' sound, you definitely want a more Marshall-y sound amp. Now, with that said, I just think those are my top three recommendations. If you have like a PV or something like that you really like, or say you like, a PRS Archon or whatever, like those are just suggestions. Really, it all comes down to your personal preference. Maybe you're like super chicken picking and want to play super fast, but you want to play in clean Fender amp. There are no real set rules. These are just ways to help narrow down the decision paralysis that might come. And with that said, there are also ways to get all three of those amps in one small package, and we're talking amp modelers. Amp modelers have been around for about 10 years now. They've been in vogue for about 10 years. They've been around for probably about 40 years, but they're now getting to the point where people can't tell the difference. You have your things like your Kemper profilers, which will capture snapshots of real tube amps. You have more amp modelers, kind of like the Fractal stuff, Fractal Audio. I have the FM9, that is my go-to board. But you also have like the Neural DSP. You have Line 6's Helix and HX Stomp models. I've done plenty of videos on those, and I think these are insanely good as well. And the cool thing is they have all different sorts of amp flavors already built in. So maybe you want a chicken picking, clean, Fendery sound on one song, and the next song you want a Vox. You can do that without having to lug around a bunch of amps. Amp modelers are great. I think everybody should start checking them out. Even, if you're like a tube snob or whatever, I think you'll be hard pressed to see and hear any differences, especially within a mix. And I certainly think that amp modelers can be extremely country if you know how to dial them in properly. Which leads to my next point of edge of breakup, dialing in those amps properly. Unless you're playing super duper clean, Don Rich style Telecaster lines, you want to set that amp to right before it starts really breaking up and distorting. This is called the edge of breakup, where it's still pretty clean, but it has a little hair on it. And then if you really want to get it over to the more saturation side, you can put a clean boost or a slight overdrive pedal, which we'll talk about here in a second, to give it to that next level. Setting the edge of breakup and then kind of doing the EQ to make it fit in the mix seems to be where guitar amplifiers work best. And that's personally where I think country guitar sounds the greatest. So dial in your gain to the edge of breakup, do some EQing to make it sound right, and then you're off to the races. And then last but not least, if you're running a guitar amp, a physical amplifier, whether it's tube or digital, solid state, whatever, you gotta learn how to mic it up properly. I'm not a radio engineer, I'm not a microphone engineer, I'm not a music engineer, so I'm not very great at this. I run amplifiers and through my Axe Effects and amp modelers for this exact reason. I don't have to think about it. But for the most part, in a nutshell, you just want to take your microphone and put it on the edge of the dust cap between the cone, the middle, and the dust cap, and that seems to be the best sounding. The further away from that center, the darker it's going to be. The closer to that center, the brighter it's going to be. Subsequently, further back, it's going to be fuller, and closer to it, it's going to be more of a direct sound. So play around with it. Like I said, with all of this, there is no rhyme or reason. There's just best practices. But whatever sounds good to you, well, that's good enough for you, and it's good enough for me, and I think you should run with it. So check out some other YouTube videos on this if you're more curious about miking amplifiers. I'm not the best person to talk about it, but something to think about if you're going to rock a tube amplifier or an actual amp on stage. So next up, we're going to talk about guitar effects. And guitar effects are kind of like toys for guitar players. And they do a lot of different things. Some do them really well. Some do them one thing really good and does everything else poorly. But it's cool because they can take simple guitar signals and sound like it's playing in front of Bridgestone Arena with 20,000 fans, all with the flip of a switch. So there are a few guitar effects that are really country that I think are essential. And there are some that add some more, flavor that are very prominent in country music. And then there are some that have no business in country music, but if you can find a way to make it country, more power to you, because it's all about art and expression here. So let's talk about some of the effects that are more popular in country music. And the first and most important effect is the delay. It's kind of like the Telecaster or the clean Fender. It is the iconic country effect unit. Everything from James Burton all the way up to Brent Mason in modern chicken pickers. If you have a clean slapback delay, you will instantly sound more country. If all you had was a clean Fender and a delay and a Telecaster, you can make your way through most country gigs. I once heard a musician say, right before he was playing the Grand Ole Opry, that you're not allowed to have any guitar pedals on stage. So much that he was like, all right, I gotta abide by it, but I still need to have my delay pedal on there. So if you really want to have one country guitar effect, it needs to be a delay. Now, the second most important guitar effect, I think, is the compressor. Compressor literally takes your guitar signal that looks kind of like this and makes the highs a little less high, a little less loud, and the lows a little higher. It kind of squeezes it, essentially. And this is really, really critical for chicken picking, to make them all sound nice and even, but also give it a little bit more of that snap. Now, a lot of guitar amps will compress as they get louder and add a little bit more gain, but if you really want that clean sound, adding a guitar compressor before the amp will really tighten up that chicken picking. Now, cowboys are known for their grit, and their guitar signal is no different. Now, it comes from all three different main flavors of drive. You have overdrive, fuzz, and distortion. And country music really ranges from no drive, clean chicken picking, all the way up to like Brantley Gilbert, who's almost considered country metal. The chances are, if you're watching this, you know what overdrive and distortion and fuzz are. It just really depends on how much you want within your signal. The Nobles ODR is a Nashville staple, and definitely one that you should check out. You probably haven't heard it nearly as much as like a Tube Screamer or a Boss DS1, but overdrive is kind of more of a personal taste. How much grit do you want in your country music? You want a lot? You want a little? You want somewhere in between? Or you want the ability to do all of the above? It really comes down to personal preference. Now, next up is the phaser, and phaser is very unique. A lot more prevalent in like rock and metal music, but in the 70s and 80s, especially in outlaw country, phasers were huge, particularly with Waylon Jennings. If you haven't heard some of those albums, or you hear kind of more swirling sound, especially when playing chords, that is a phaser. And if you're looking for more of that outlaw sound, a phaser is definitely necessary for country music. And lastly, chorus pedal. Chorus pedals, kind of like phasers, they were very popular in the 80s. And if you've noticed that 80s references are very in vogue right now, particularly in country music, whether it's Keith Urban's Wasted Time, Brad Paisley's Old Alabama, Brothers Osborne, Midnight Rider's Prayer. There's a lot of references to 80s music. And subsequently 80s sounds as well. Chorus was drenched all over the 80s pop music and pop rock, pop country as well. So if you want to add some 80s flair to your country music, definitely add a chorus as well. Now that's great. You've talked a lot about a bunch of different effects, Ryan, but what order should I put those in? Well, there is no right reason, and I know you're looking for a general best practices, and it goes tuner, like a pitch altering effect, kind of like a Digitech drop pedal, then usually a compression, then your gain, modulation, delay, and then reverb. Now, if your amplifier has a effects loop and you don't want to utilize everything up front, everything after the gain typically will go into that effects loop. That will make it sound different than if it went into the beginning of the amplifier. You can certainly go either way, but there's a unique sound with a delay in front of a dirtier amp than versus a delay in the effects loop of a dirtier amp, and vice versa with clean stuff. So really just play around with it, but that is the typical order that you want to use when setting up your effects pedals. The next thing I want to talk about are accessories. Just because you have your guitar and your amps and your pedals doesn't mean there aren't other things that you might want to consider. These aren't necessary items, but they certainly can make your playing a lot more enjoyable. Things like capos, especially if you need to change a key very quickly. Guitar picks. I think guitar picks are almost a necessity, especially if you're playing chicken picking. Guitar straps, guitar stands, both more important when you're playing live than maybe sitting at home at a desk or a studio. Things like guitar strings, very important. You don't want to keep those dusty old strings on there forever. A guitar tuner. If you don't have a guitar tuner pedal, one of these clip-ons, and I don't have one here laying around, but you want to have your guitar in tune. So there are definitely a bunch of different accessories that you want to consider when you're building out your country guitar kit and rig. In the book, I already assumed that you knew open cowboy chords. I'm going to assume that you already know how to change your guitar strings as well. With that said, if you don't know how to change your guitar strings, email me right now at the screen, and I'll make sure I add that in the next version of this video and of the book. These are fresh strings, so you always want to make sure you have fresh strings on before you do any maintenance work. With that said, if you don't have any fresh strings, you really have bad action, you want to fix it immediately, that's your call. But it's always a best practice to change your strings while you're doing the maintenance. That way the new strings can break in the new guitar at the same time, so it's fresh. You have the proper tension that it's needed, because older guitar strings kind of lose its tension over time, or are more prone to breaking. So I always like to have fresh strings on when I'm doing any kind of maintenance work before I get started. Next thing we're going to talk about is the neck relief. And what the neck relief essentially refers to, I'll turn my guitar on the side, is how straight the neck is. Traditionally, the neck is going to bow back a little bit. So where the guitar is connected to the body, and the neck is connected to the body and the nut, it's going to be slightly behind the middle of the fretboard, and that just gives it the proper angle. With that said, it's not going to be a whole lot. As you can tell, this is, for the most part, fairly straight, but there is going to be a little bit of relief. Exaggeration on the page below. But essentially, you want to get to the perfect spot where the frets are even to press down throughout the neck, and it's comfortable and you don't have to go too far. On most guitars, you're going to have the truss rod right here. This is a Warmoth neck, so the truss rod adjustment screw is actually right there, if you can see it. You just want to take your Allen key, and this actually does not work with this set for the most part, but you adjust it right there. Let me go get a guitar that has normal ones. So here's your standard PRS. Gibsons have the same thing. Fenders usually have the same thing typically. What you want to do is remove the truss rod cover. And again, it's easier if you take this piece off. You can see there is your truss rod right there. See it up there. Now, for PRSs, you need a certain tool, but essentially, see if I can do it here. What you want to do is take your Allen key, put it here, and if you want more of a up bow, which means that these areas are a little bit higher than in the middle, you turn it counterclockwise. And if you want more of a back bow, which means you're trying to put the middle part a little bit higher, in the middle part I mean kind of all of this area closer to the strings, you want to turn it clockwise. Only do this really at like half turn increments at most, and you want to make sure you tune every time you make slight adjustments. And this is going to bring your guitar action a little bit higher or lower depending on which way you go, make your guitar more comfortable to play or get rid of that string buzz. So this is probably one of the more challenging things to do with the maintenance side of things, but if you practice a little bit, you will get your guitar set up exactly how you want them. Now, I love this guitar, but this method at the headstock is absolutely the worst way to adjust a truss rod. It's the most common way, but I think it's the worst. Warmoth does a decent job with the ones down here. You don't have to take things off too much, but let me grab another guitar. This is more prominent on higher end Fenders in particular. And certainly like Ernie Ball. This is an Ernie Ball Richardson 6 Sterling, I guess. Not an Ernie Ball, but you know, whatever. And you can tell it has it down here, which is really cool. So all you have to do is put it down there and go, you know, clockwise or counterclockwise. I think this is the coolest way and easiest way to adjust your neck relief. And I wish most guitars had them. And it seems like more and more guitars are going this way, but I think that's the best way manufacturers can set it up. But you know, it all really depends on your guitar that you have. As far as tools go, any real tool kit will work, and the tools that you have around your house. I have this thing called an iFixit. I use this both for electronics and my guitar. I keep it at my desk. It has everything that you would need from your standard guitar screws. I don't know if you can see that. Probably not. To your Allen keys, and it comes with this cool little driver. So I like using that. You can use whatever you want, but yeah, if you're interested, I'll leave this down below. You don't need it, but this is what I use. So first thing we're going to talk about is setting your intonation. The intonation essentially means the difference between the nut right here, as you can see on the screen, and the bridge. This is supposed to be 25.5 inches. It's a Fender Telecaster, so it needs to be that length. So what we want to set your intonation is we're looking for this 12th fret to be the same as the open string. So this is an E. This should also be an E. This is an A. 99.9 guitars, that will already be the case, but they might be off by a little bit of cents here and there. So the best way to do this is, if your Telecaster has this little thingamajig, you can take that off. You can see down here on the saddles, there are 3 screws on a Telecaster. On something like a Les Paul, it'll be a little bit different. Other guitars, they might have 6 individual saddle screws. What you want to do is essentially tighten or loosen this depending on if you need to tune it up or tune it down to make sure that this string matches this string exactly. So for mine, yep, that one. So when you open this, if this note, the fretted note, is a little bit of flat, you want to drive the screw in the bridge that way, towards the nut. And if this is sharp, you want to drive it that way, away from the nut. Do it in really small increments. Make sure you have your tuner nearby. So open string. All right, a little bit of flat. So I'm going to go retune each time until you get it right. Now I move on to the next string. This will ensure that the notes up the neck are in fact in tune. You might be in tune in your open E, open A, D, G, B, and E, your open strings, but the second you start fretting it, you'll notice that maybe they don't sound entirely correct. That's because your intonation is set wrong. So that's an easy way that you can set your intonation, something that you can do fairly easy at home without a whole lot of experience. Next, we're going to talk about setting your pickup height. As you can tell, I have 2 pickups on this Telecaster. I got the neck and we got the bridge. Most pickups, let me grab PRS as well, just so you can see for clarity's sake. Most guitars have 2 screws on each side of the pickup. You can see here, there's a screw there, there's a screw there, there's a screw there, there's a screw there. That is to adjust the pickup height. Telecaster is a little bit different. The neck pickup has those 2 screws. The bridge actually has 3 screws because it's set at an angle. So you have one here, and one here. Now what you want to do, if the guitar is a little too bright, you want to lower the pickups and to mellow it out a little bit. So what you want to do is take your screwdriver. It's actually the same for the most part as your bridge one. So you just do it here. And if you want to make it more mellow and less bright, rotate it that way. So like this. And then that's for the bass side, or the lower strings, lower octave strings, but the bigger strings. And then this one is the treble side, and you just screw it that way. Alternatively, if you want to make it brighter, you go the other way. You go clockwise. And that's actually really easy to do on mine. I can almost do that with my finger. I should probably get a new screw for that. For the bridge pickup of Telecasters, this is going to be your treble side, this is going to be your bass side. You might want to play along with this just a little bit, just to make sure that it's kind of even. But adjust till your sound is how you like it. And make sure, for the most part, I like to set these pretty evenly. If anything, I like the bass, the neck pickup to be a little bit quieter than the treble, because I want the treble to really punch through if I'm soloing. And the bass side has a lot more bass in it, so you want to keep out those frequencies, because that's where the bass guitar lives. So I like to make, if anything, the treble a little bit hotter than the bass, but for the most part, I like to even them out. Next thing we're going to talk about is keeping your guitar clean. This one is going to be, I don't know, I like as you can tell here, there's some black spots on the maple neck. It looks like it's worn in more so than it is, mainly because modern guitars don't really wear in like they did in the 50s and 60s. So I kind of like the dirt and grime. Might be hated in the comments for that, but I kind of like it because it adds a little bit of character on it. So I don't necessarily wipe off all this stuff, but I do like getting the dirt and the dust off. And what you never want to use is paper towels because it will leave markings. This is not the most fine stuff. I mean, you can use it if you're like really in a pinch and you're really trying to get the dust out. You can see my guitar's pretty dusty, but you don't want to use like normal guitar cleaner. They do have guitar polish for that stuff. I really don't use it. I have a thing of it and I hardly ever use it. I just take a microfiber cloth like this that you would use for like your glasses or something like that and just rub it down. They have fretboard polish as well. Something to note on the fretboard polish, if you have a maple neck, don't use it. It doesn't need it. If you have rosewood, yeah, you could use it as like a fretboard conditioner or whatever it's called. The Dunlop 65. I never use it, but if you really want to use it, go ahead. Microfiber cloth for picking up the dust. Thing to note, it's a great time to wipe things down with a microfiber cloth when you're changing your strings and you have them already off. As you can see, like this is kind of tedious to try to get underneath there, but if you just change your strings, you forgot to wipe it down, it can be done. It's just going to be more of a pain in the neck. So yeah, microfiber cloth, something that you can use. You get these like $3 on Amazon or something like that. The same ones you use to clean your glasses, and you'll be off to the races. And it's nice and soft because it doesn't scratch glasses, so it'll be nice and good on your guitar finish if you care about that. I'm one of the people that like kind of beat up guitars, but I want to beat them up myself. So I don't really clean my guitars a whole lot, just kind of get the dust off. And you can clearly see I didn't get the dust off when I changed my strings for sake of this video, but there you go. Make sure your guitar is nice and clean. So part of guitar maintenance is keeping your guitar safe. I keep all my guitars out in stands. Why? Because I use them every day. I use all of them. I use most of them every day. I only have 5 of them. So I like to keep them out in stands. I can easily grab them when I'm recording, making videos, just wanting to practice. But if you're really concerned about the guitar and keeping it in pristine shape, maybe you have a very nice vintage Les Paul. Probably not if you're watching this video, but you might. Keep it in its guitar case. Keep it in the guitar case is the safest spot for any guitar. If it tips over, if you have cats, if you have kids, if you have dogs, if you have pet gerbil, whatever. Keeping it in its guitar case is going to be the safest place. One thing to note on this, if you're already struggling to practice, like you're like, oh yeah, I need to practice guitar, it's been like 6 months, because you keep it in its case and it's away, out of sight, out of mind. So if you're struggling to practice, I highly suggest getting like a Hercules guitar case or a guitar stand. I have a Trio one over there. I'll put an image on the screen. It locks things in. They have hanging wall ones too, or a single guitar stand. It locks it in, so it's harder to knock over and it won't fall over as easily as something like this. Whoa. Something like this that doesn't have much support. I use this for the guitar that I'm currently playing. Keep it in a locked stand. Keep it in a guitar case if you want it to be secure, but if you're struggling playing, I know I'm kind of being a dead horse and repeating myself a lot here. Keep it out of the case, but the case does and is the safest spot for your instrument. Next thing I want to talk about is the broken or loose strap pins. This is a strap pin, if you're not aware. This little gold thing right here. This is what you put your guitar strap on. What I've noticed is that these can get loose over time. More so on cheaper guitars and more expensive guitars, but these can get loose over time. There's an easy fix to that. And what you essentially do is fill it with glue. I use toothpicks. And and you just put toothpicks in there with glue. You clip off the ends, let it dry, and then you screw it into it, and it's like filling it up with glue. You can also use sawdust, or if you're more hands-on and crafty, you can use dowels and fill it with a dowel, etc. Check out this video over here. It's how you fix loose guitar pins. It's how I use it, and it saves me from having to re-drill. It saves a lot of headaches. So if your pins are loose, go check out that video and how to fix it. Now, next thing I want to talk about is if any of this stuff is overwhelming you, or it's too much, you aren't capable. I don't want to say capable. You aren't confident in your abilities to do any of this stuff, take it to a guitar tech. I know a bunch of YouTube videos are like, you should be able to do this stuff at home. If you don't know how to do this stuff, like don't worry about it. Don't stress yourself out about it. Learn, sure. I mean, learning is always a good thing. You're learning now, right? But if some of it is kind of intimidating, definitely take it to a guitar tech, especially the intonation and the neck relief stuff. That stuff's a little bit more challenging, and it does take a little bit of work. And if you want your instrument to be set up properly, and you're just like, hey, like I don't have the time to do it, go ahead and take it to a guitar tech. Don't feel bad about that. So you want to steal from these artists if you want to play country music and become a proficient chicken picker, proficient country guitar player. Obviously, you want to listen to the people who move your soul the most, learn from them, figure out their licks, their styles, their tendencies. But in this video, we're going to talk about the guitar players that you really should dive into. This is kind of like a textbook of country music, chicken picking. It ranges from the 50s all the way up to present. So if you really want to master the art of twanging on a Telecaster over 3 chords and the truth, you need to follow these guys and girls and learn from them. Take their licks, steal their techniques, steal their licks, their sounds, and make them your own. So let's get into it. If you're interested, I do have a Spotify playlist in the description box below that I have grabbed my favorite tracks off of the albums that we're going to discuss today, put them there in a Spotify playlist for you to enjoy. So go check that out and add it to your library if you're interested. Let's get on with the video. First up is Brad Paisley. Brad Paisley is one of my personal favorite guitar players of all time, and my favorite guitar player for the country music genre. He has been on the scene since the 90s, and he's only recently started to slow down a little bit, but he has a tremendous amount of work. I've put up 4 albums on the screen here, and they are Who Needs Pictures, Mud on the Tires, Fifth Gear, and Play. Fifth Gear was my first true Brad Paisley album that I remember listening to when I was in high school, but these are my favorite Brad Paisley albums. Every Brad Paisley album, you can literally listen to any track and it's going to sound absolutely incredible. So I highly recommend all of them. But if I was going to boil it down to 4, it would be these ones. Who Needs Pictures is his first and arguably most traditional country music. Kind of harks back towards those new traditional early 50s, 60s sounds. And it still has that Brad Paisley comedic humor, both from lyrically, situationally and musically, of course. But I think the penultimate Brad Paisley album is Play. He has a lot of cool guests on there, Keith Urban and B.B. King to name a few. But his song Chicken Pickin', I think, is the ultimate country guitar playing song that you should learn. It's really hard, but you should learn it because you'll learn so much from so many other guitar players too. A lot of other guests that we're going to go over today played on that one record. Finally won Brad Paisley his Grammy. I believe it was a Grammy for Best Instrumental. So anyways, check out those 4 albums. They are filled with country goodness. Next up is Brent Mason. Brent Mason is also one of my top favorite guitar players of all time. Number 2 place in the country music scene for me. Maybe this list is in order, maybe it's not. I can't remember how I did it. But Brent Mason is definitely number 2. He's been on thousands of different records. If you go to All Music, you can see how many that he's accredited to. He started in the 90s and he hasn't shown any signs of stopping. It might even been the late 80s. But he's still to this day playing on your hit records coming out of Nashville. Some of Brent Mason's most iconic guitar albums are Alan Jackson's A Lot About Livin' and A Little About Love. That's the song with Chattahoochee on it. Brooks and Dunn's Brand New Man, which includes Brand New Man, Neon Moon, and my personal favorite, Boot Scootin' Boogie. And then, of course, Shania Twain's Come On Over, which includes Man, I Feel Like a Woman, which I think everybody who loves country music loves that song. And then, of course, there's Brent Mason's solo album, which is Hot Wired. The title track off that album is absolutely insane. It's him and Paul Franklin just going and playing some shredding pedal steel and lead Telecaster lines. So go check out those songs. Next, we're going to talk about Roy Nichols. Roy Nichols is known as Merle Haggard's guitar player. Most of you guys are probably familiar with Roy Nichols. I don't have to talk much about him other than listen to every single Merle Haggard record you can get your hands on, because there is Telecaster country gold smeared all over them. Here are some of my favorites, but your favorite Merle Haggard record will do just fine. Just learn some Roy Nichols licks and you will be off to the races with playing country music. Next up is James Burton, who undoubtedly is one of the best Telecaster pickers of all time, and arguably probably started the modern, well, I say modern, but neo-traditional, traditional country guitar chicken picking style. He played on everything from Elvis Presley, and there's a cat. Here's Ray. He played on a ton of Elvis Presley songs. Emmylou Harris's Luxury Liner. I love that song. And the whole album's great, but that song in particular is fantastic. He played on Graham Parsons' album Grievous Angel, which, Graham Parsons from the Byrds. Fantastic album. And he also played with Ralph Mooney. He did a chicken pickin' country and then a pedal steel album, which is incredible as well. Do yourself some favor. Learn some James Burton records and licks, and you will be a chicken pickin' master. Next up is Clay Cook. Now, Clay Cook, if you don't know, is one of the guitar players for the Zac Brown Band. Love him or hate him, I absolutely love the guitar playing on the Zac Brown Band records, especially You Get What You Give, Caged, and the Pass the Jar, which is live from the Fox Theater down in Georgia. The song off of You Get What You Give, but more importantly, the song off of Pass the Jar, which is the live version of Who Knows, is a jammy 11, 12-minute country, smothered country guitar riffage with fiddle going and Clay Cook just absolutely ripping it. So if you haven't listened to that album, go listen to that live album, because Zac Brown Band, I mean, they were incredible back then. Their music's been all over the place kind of in the last couple records. I think the last record actually sounding good and it's going back to the roots. But Clay Cook has always been a monster. So much, in fact, the song No Such Thing by John Mayer, which is off of the album Room for Squares, was actually written by Clay Cook. He collaborated with John Mayer a lot in John's early days. I'm not sure if they do it much anymore or not, but I thought that was a fun fact, because Clay Cook has literally been all over the place, and he is an incredible guitar player. John Osborne is next of the brothers Osborne, Maryland, Dewey, Maryland, or Boone, Maryland, native. Listen to any Brothers Osborne records and you will know he is an incredible guitar player. I've done a couple of videos on this channel about John Osborne already. Of course, all the Brothers Osborne records are incredible for learning John Osborne licks. But also, for y'all who didn't know, he also helped work on some session work with Maren Morris and Little Big Town. So go check out some of those albums. John Osborne is an incredible guitar player. I think my third favorite country guitar player of all time. It's just really getting back to those neo-traditional honky-tonk riffs, and he just sounds incredible. The man who probably needs no introduction ever since his debut with Justin Timberlake at the CMAs is Chris Stapleton. He's been racking up award ceremonies. He's a great guitar player. But for y'all who didn't know, he was also in a bluegrass band, the Steel Drivers, before he got his big break in 2015 as a solo artist. He's been on tons of different records before then, and writers' rounds. He wrote a ton of your favorite songs, like from Garth Brooks and stuff like that. Garth Brooks, Tim McGraw. Chris Stapleton wrote a lot of those songs, but he's an incredible guitar player as well. I think we all know that. Any Chris Stapleton song is a good song to learn on the guitar, and it's a good song that I'm going to probably enjoy and listen to anyway. So go check out more Chris Stapleton. Next up is Keith Urban. Now, everybody knows Keith Urban, I think, for the most part. But Keith Urban really is a monster guitar player, especially on his earlier stuff. More late stuff has been a little bit more poppy. Country music is transitioning. That's okay. But check out some of his earlier albums, especially from the Golden Road. There is some solid chicken picking stuff. And that is Keith Urban playing. He doesn't really, I think he has a lead guitar player in his band now because he's more focused on the show and singing and whatnot. But Keith Urban really can rip the guitar. So check out some of his earlier stuff because they are chicken picking. And then some of his more mid 2000 stuff is more rocking. So really cool sounds that he can get out of his instrument. And cool thing, if you have a Fractal, I have the FM9. One of Keith Urban's amps is an amp that is in the Fractal unit. So if you're a Fractal unit and you like Keith Urban, it's a double whammy. Keith has been really cool to the Fractal audio community as well. Next up is a name that a lot of new players probably aren't familiar with, but it's Don Rich, who is a lead guitar player for Buck Owens, who Brad Paisley cites as the reason that he is the guitar player that he is today is because of Buck Owens. Songs like Tiger by Your Tail, Buckaroo, just a wealth and vast knowledge of the Bakersfield sound, that traditional honky-tonk from the late 50s and 60s. Go check out any Don Rich song. Go check out, I'm going to say 99% of Buck Owens songs are going to have Don Rich on them, at least up until the 70s when he passed away. They are incredible. It is a country gold mine, his playing. You will not be disappointed. You'll be like, how have I never heard of this guy? Don Rich, Buck Owens, and the Buckaroos. Just great music all around. Next up, we have Red Volkart. Red Volkart is known as a prolific Telecaster player, not really known for playing on a whole lot of different records that are commercialized, but he is one incredible guitar player. I believe he played in Don Kelly's band as well. Make sure that's right. If you don't know who Don Kelly is, look him up. He is a Nashville guy who puts together the best country guitar players, and they play a lot at Robert's Western World down on Broadway. Been around forever. A lot of incredible country music players. A lot of players on this list have played in his band, so go check him out. Go listen to some Red Volkart songs. They are chicken picking, smothered hot licks that I think everybody needs to learn. And if you're interested, he also has a lot of courses on like True Fire and stuff like that. So you can learn from the master himself. A great way to learn some country guitar, chicken picking. The traditional stuff that makes you go, yeah, now I feel like a guitar slinger on the country circuit. Next up is Vince Gill. While Vince Gill has a tremendous solo career in the 90s and early 2000s, he's been playing with the Eagles lately. You're playing with the Eagles, you must be an incredible guitar player. But my favorite, though, is his record with Paul Franklin. It is just country. I want to say country gold, but I feel like I've said that so often. Paul Franklin, for those you don't know, is the best pedal steel guitar player in the world, in the history of the world, and it will never be another. He is just magical on the pedal steel. So him and Vince Gill just produced some of the greatest country songs and sounds that I've ever heard. Albert Lee, we have our first non-American here on the list. Maybe Red might be Canadian, but I can't remember. Anyways, Albert Lee is a fantastic guitar chicken picker from Britain. Great Britain, England, over there, overseas. Plays a lot of it on a Strat, or now I guess it's Ernie Ball signature, but it is classic country sounds. Albert Lee, great singer, great guitar player. Check out these records and you'll be blown away. John Jorgensen is another fairly unknown guitar player, which is a shame because he is 1/3 of an incredible band called the Hellcasters, a bunch of session guys. Him, Jerry Donahue, and Will Ray make up the Hellcasters, and they are just ripping guitar solos after guitar solos after guitar solos. Jerry Donahue is very unique in his country music style. Very unique in his country music style, so go check it out. Steve Werner is another great country guitar chicken picker. He had a kind of his own solo artist line as well as some session work. He played on a lot of Clint Black songs. If you like Clint Black, you're going to like Steve Werner his music, or at least his guitar playing, so go check him out. He is a fantastic chicken picker. JT Cornfloss is next, and he's probably the most unknown chicken picker on this list. He played on a lot of modern country music, a lot of the Dierks Bentley records, some Carrie Underwood records. He unfortunately passed away a few years ago, but his music will forever live on. And if you've never heard the name, I guarantee you've heard at least 15, 20, 30 of his songs on the record. Here are some of my favorites, but the list is so much longer. So with all this, I will leave a link to AllMusic. Type in any of these players down below at allmusic.com, and just to see what all they've been playing on. You'll be blown away. You'll be like, I had no idea that guitar player played on my favorite song or record. So go check it out. It's kind of like passing along the vinyl records or the CDs back when you were younger, maybe a younger generation, when you're listening to music, to see who all played on records. JT Cornfloss, it's incredible how much music he's played on. Marty Stewart. Marty Stewart's probably well known more so for his individual stuff, but he also played on some Johnny Cash records and some Lester Flatt records. He's an incredible picker. He's been around forever. If you haven't listened to him, I don't know where you've been. Go listen to some Marty Stewart. Tom Bukovac is one of those other modern country session players. Played on some early Taylor Swift records, some Carrie Underwood records, some Kenny Chesney records. He has a guitar channel called Echo Space Delay, or Delay Space Echo. Anyways, Uncle Larry, chances are you guys know who Tom Bukovac is, but definitely go check out Tom Bukovac, his all-page music, to see what all he has played on. He doesn't really talk about it a whole lot. It's more of a guitar channel, more so than the session stuff. Or at least he didn't tell commercially what songs he's playing on, but it's pretty cool to see which ones he has and how readily available and how open he is to the public to talk about his guitar playing. So go check him out. Andy Gatton is, I would say, the best country guitar picker who was never fully appreciated. Kind of like Van Gogh, where he wasn't appreciated until afterwards. And then really only the avant-garde country guitar players really see the brilliance that is Danny Gatton. I can't really say much other than, like, you need to hear it for yourself to experience how brilliant this man is on a Telecaster. Go check him out. Johnny Hyland is one of those other Don Kelly guitar players who is just an incredible, incredible chicken picker. He played on a few Toby Keith records, and Hank III, who's Hank Jr.'s son, Hank Williams' grandson. He plays on a lot of Hank III records, but Johnny Hyland can shred some country licks. Go check him out. Like Red Valkart, he has a lot of country guitar lessons on, like, TrueFire, stuff like that. So go check him out if you want to learn from the master himself. Steve Gibson is another prolific country guitar session player from the 70s and 80s, playing on Kenny Rogers records, Randy Travis records, and my favorite George Strait record, Clear Blue Sky. Now, Chris Lusinger is an incredible guitar player. You've probably heard of him, if not in just referencing songs, but he is Garth Brooks' guitar player, and he's played on a lot of Garth Brooks albums. He might have played on every Garth Brooks album. I'm not entirely sure, but he played on a lot of Garth Brooks albums. Anytime you hear some lead guitar playing in Garth Brooks songs, it is Chris Lusinger. He is just incredible, and he is so catchy, and the two just go hand in hand when it comes to great neo-traditional country music. Reggie Young is another legendary session guitar player, playing on Willie Nelson's records, Merle Haggard records, Kenny Rogers records, the Highwaymen record, which is, if you haven't listened to the Highwaymen, go pause this video, go listen to that entire album now, because it is country gold. But if you're watching this video, chances are you've already heard it and love it. So that's all I'll say about that. Reggie Young is an incredible, fantastic guitar player who needs no introduction, maybe by name, but you've heard all of his songs. Brent Rowan is next, and he has played on some of my favorite guitar records, country records of all time. Pat Green's Wave on Wave, How Do You Like Me Now by Toby Keith, some Tim McGraw records. He is a great, great session guitar player, very, very popular in the 90s and early 2000s. I think he's still doing stuff as well, but he is an incredible session guitar player that you need to listen more of. Last but not least is Daniel Donato. Daniel Donato is very new to the scene. He is what he calls cosmic country, which is mixing in elements of jam band and classic traditional honky tonk playing. He's an incredible guitar player. He teaches lessons over at Pickup Music if you are a subscriber to that. I've never tried any of his lessons, but from his YouTube channel, he is an incredible teacher and even a better guitar player. So go listen to some Daniel Donato, especially if you like Fish or like Humphreys McGee, Grateful Dead. Well, there you go. That is your 3.5-hour masterclass. Everything you need to know to play country music. It covers about 90, 95, 99% of country music you're going to hear on the radio, some of the classics. You're going to be able to play your favorite music. If you're interested, you can go find a link down below to the latest version of the Everything You Need to Know to Play Country Music book. There'll be a link down in the description box below. I can't wait to hear the music that you put out there and start on your country music playing journey. So go out there and create something amazing. And until next time, let the music play.